Strip! Take it all off now!" Eliza froze, her bare feet pressing into the cold dirt floor of the cabin. The air was thick, a sour mix of old sweat, cheap whiskey, and something else. Fear. Silas Crow, the man who had bought her, leaned forward from his rickety chair. He was twice her age, with teeth the color of yellow corn and eyes that crawled over her like spiders. His voice was a whip, cracking through the tense silence. Her lips trembled as she found a word she hadn't used in years. A word she'd forgotten she owned. No. The word was small, fragile, but it hung in the air like a shard of glass. For the first time since her mother died, she dared to refuse. She wrapped her arms around her thin frame, clutching the torn sleeve of her dress, a useless shield for her dignity. But dignity was all she had left. Silas wasn't impressed. He slammed a meaty palm down on the table. The wood groaned in protest. His chair screeched against the floor as he rose, a mountain of a man towering over her, blotting out the flickering lamplight. "I said strip, girl," he sneered, the words slithering from his mouth. "Or that worthless stepfather of yours will never see a single cent." Her stomach twisted into a knot. Her heart was a drum, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, louder than the storm that was starting to brew outside. She thought of Roy Dalton, the man who was supposed to be her father, the man who had taken her in after her mother was gone, only to gamble away every last piece of their life. Their land, their livestock, their future. He'd dragged her here himself, led her to this foul cabin like a calf to the auction block. And right now, he was standing just outside that door, waiting for the deal to be done, waiting for his silver. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, hot and sharp, but she clenched her jaw. She would not cry. Not for him. I won't do it. Silas's eyes narrowed to slits. A sick, twisted smile curled his lips, showing the rot within. "Then I'll make you." He moved faster than a man his size should. He lunged. His hand cracked across her cheek, the sting sharp and immediate, like a lash of rawhide. She stumbled back, slamming against the rough-hewn logs of the cabin wall. Her head spun, the room tilting on its axis. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons. He yanked her close, his whiskey breath hot on her face, and tore at the collar of her dress. The sound of fabric ripping echoed in the small space, a final, humiliating sound. She gasped, the shame burning hotter than the pain blooming on her cheek. She pushed at his chest, her hands feeble against his solid bulk. He was a predator, and he smelled blood in the water. He laughed, a low, guttural sound that held no humor, only the promise of cruelty, a laugh that promised no mercy would be found here. "You think you got a choice?" he rasped. "You don't." Her breath came in ragged, shallow bursts. Her lungs felt tight, useless. She was trapped, cornered. But then, a memory. Her mother's voice, a lifetime ago, whispering lullabies in the dark, telling her she had a fire inside her, telling her she was stronger than any man would ever admit. That memory sparked like flint in the darkness of her mind. A tiny flame of defiance. Eliza's eyes darted around the room, desperate. And then she saw it. There on the floor, half hidden beneath a grimy blanket, was a piece of wood. A broken plank, splintered and sharp at one end. Her fingers twitched. Silas shoved her again, his other hand clawing at the front of her ripped dress. She cried out, the sound raw and desperate, swallowed by the rising wind outside. "Nobody's coming to save you!" he hissed in her ear, his grip tightening. "So just stop fighting!" But Eliza did fight. With a sudden surge of terror and pure, undiluted fury, she twisted in his grasp. She ducked under his thick arm, her free hand snatching at the splintered plank. Her fingers closed around the rough wood. It was solid. It was real. She spun, putting every ounce of her desperation into the motion. The board swung in a wide arc, connecting with his temple with a sickening wet crack. Silas staggered. A look of pure shock washed over his face. His greedy eyes rolled back in his head. He crumpled to the dirt floor like a felled ox, a single groan escaping his lips before he fell completely still. The cabin fell silent. The only sound was Eliza's own ragged breathing, loud and harsh in the sudden quiet. Her hands shook, still clutching the bloodied plank. Tears finally broke free, streaking through the dirt and grime on her face. She couldn't tell if she was trembling from fear or from the terrifying power of what she had just done. She looked at the body on the floor. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. She had killed him. The thought hit her like a physical blow. She was a murderer. And her stepfather was still outside. He thought the deal was being sealed inside this cabin. He thought she was being broken. Instead, a man lay dead at her feet. Eliza stared at the door, her mind a whirlwind of panic. The plank slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the dirt with a soft thud. The choice was brutally clear. Run. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She threw the door open and plunged out into the brewing storm. The wind tore at her, whipping her hair across her face. Rain was beginning to fall, cold and sharp against her skin. She glanced back for a second. Roy stood by the horses, his face a mask of confusion. His eyes widened as he saw her, then flickered to the open cabin door behind her. He saw the body. "Eliza!" His voice was a strangled cry of disbelief and fury. He started toward her. She didn't wait. She ran. She ran into the howling wind and the growing darkness, barefoot and exposed, with nothing left in the world but the terror driving her forward. She was a killer on the run, hunted by the very man who sold her. Could a girl who had just taken a life ever find safety? Or was she just trading one monster for another? The world was a blur of darkness and rain. Eliza's lungs burned, each breath a searing pain. The storm had broken in full, and the cold mud sucked at her bare feet, trying to pull her down. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in stark, terrifying flashes of white. In those brief moments, she could see the open fields stretching out before her, empty and vast. She glanced over her shoulder. A light was bobbing in the distance, a lantern. Roy was coming for her. Panic gave her a new burst of speed. She pushed harder, her muscles screaming in protest. She had to find a place to hide. Anywhere. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and roots that tore at the soles of her feet. She stumbled, falling hard to her knees, the impact jarring her to the bone. She scrambled back up, mud and blood caking her legs, and kept running. The lantern seemed to be getting closer. She could almost hear the thunder of a horse's hooves over the roar of the storm. He was on horseback. She was on foot. It was a race she couldn't possibly win. Her body was giving out. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a desperate, failing beat. Just ahead, a dark line emerged from the gloom, a fence, and beyond it, the silhouette of a house. A single light glowed in one window, a tiny beacon in the overwhelming darkness. Hope, fragile and thin, flickered within her. She pushed with the last of her strength, her legs churning through the mud. She reached the fence, her fingers fumbling with the wet wood. It was a simple rail fence, but in her exhausted state, it felt like a mountain. She hauled herself over, collapsing on the other side in a heap of mud and shivering limbs. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the rain plastering her torn dress to her skin. She had made it. She was on someone else's land. But then she heard it. The horse whinnied. Close now. Too close. The lantern lights swung wildly, casting long, dancing shadows across the field. Roy was at the fence line. He couldn't have seen where she crossed. Not in this storm. Could he? Then a voice cut through the wind, rough and angry. "I know you're in there, girl! You can't hide from me!" She froze. He knew. She pushed herself up, crawling on her hands and knees toward the distant ranch house. Every movement was agony. The light in the window seemed 1,000,000 miles away. The sound of boots hit the ground on her side of the fence. He was coming over. He was going to find her. He was going to drag her back. And after what she'd done to Silas, she knew he wouldn't just be angry, he would be terrified. And a terrified man is the most dangerous animal of all. Suddenly, the light in the ranch house window went out. The house was plunged into total darkness. Her heart sank. Had they seen Roy's lantern? Were they hiding? Locking their doors against the trouble that had just landed on their doorstep? She was alone again, trapped between the storm and the monster hunting her. Then, a new sound. The heavy, deliberate creak of a porch swing, and then a deep voice, calm and steady, that carried over the wind. "That's far enough, friend." Roy stopped dead. His lantern beam swung toward the house, revealing the dark outline of a man sitting on the porch, a rifle resting across his lap. "This is private property," the voice continued, smooth as polished stone. "And you ain't welcome on it?" Eliza held her breath, hidden in the tall, wet grass. Roy hesitated, his bravado faltering. "I'm looking for my girl. She ran off, stole from me." The man on the porch didn't move. "I don't see any girl. I just see a man with a lantern trespassing on my land in the middle of a storm. I suggest you turn around and ride back the way you came." The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Roy stared at the dark silhouette on the porch, at the long, dark line of the rifle. He was a gambler, but he knew a bad bet when he saw one. He muttered a curse under his breath, turned and climbed back over the fence. A moment later, the sound of his horse's hooves faded back into the storm. He was gone. For now. Eliza lay in the grass, shaking uncontrollably, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her sick. The man on the porch stood up. His boots made a slow, steady sound on the wooden boards. He was coming toward her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know if he was any better than the men she'd just escaped. She only knew that he had a rifle, and she was trespassing on his land, and he had just seen Roy Dalton, her stepfather, claim she was a thief. What would this man believe? And more importantly, what would he do? The rain began to soften, turning from a driving torrent to a steady drizzle. The boots on the wet soil grew closer, slow, deliberate, heavy. Eliza tried to push herself up, to run again, but her body wouldn't obey. Her strength was completely gone. She could only lie there, helpless, as the dark figure approached. He stopped a few feet away. She couldn't see his face in the gloom, only his large, imposing silhouette. For a long moment, the world was silent, save for the dripping of water and her own ragged breaths. Then he spoke, his voice the same one from the porch, low, calm, and without a trace of panic. "You can come out now. He's gone." She didn't move. She couldn't. Fear held her pinned to the ground. He sighed, a quiet sound. "I'm not gonna hurt you, miss. You're on my land now. You're safe. Safe." The word sounded foreign, like a language she'd long forgotten. Slowly, painstakingly, she pushed herself to a sitting position. The movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her bruised body. She clutched the torn, muddy remnants of her dress, trying to cover herself. He still didn't move closer. He gave her space. "My name is Harlan Boone," he said. He waited. When she didn't answer, he took a careful step forward. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating his face. He was older, his beard streaked with gray. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were calm, steady, and held a deep, weary sadness, as if he'd seen more of the world's ugliness than any one man should have to. He wasn't looking at her with pity or with greed. He was just looking. He shrugged off his heavy canvas coat. It was clearly worn, but well cared for. He stepped forward and gently draped it over her trembling shoulders. It was warm from his body, and it smelled of leather, rain, and wood smoke. The simple act of kindness was so unexpected, it broke through the wall of her shock. A choked sob escaped her lips. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft. "Let's get you inside, out of this weather." Without asking permission, he bent down and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Her body was light, too light, as if the world had already taken more than its share from her. He carried her across the muddy yard, his steps sure and steady. He walked past the worn porch steps and into the quiet darkness of his house. Inside, he lit a lamp. The room that flickered into view was simple, clean, and orderly. A stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table, a single bed in the corner. It was the home of a man who lived alone. He set her down gently in a chair by the cold hearth. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press her for answers. He simply moved to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room and opened it. He pulled out a folded dress. The cloth was a faded blue, softened by countless washings. It was a simple, practical dress, but it was clean and whole. He placed it in her hands. "This belonged to my wife," he said, his voice quiet. "She's been gone a long time. I reckon she'd want you to have it." He turned his back, giving her privacy while she changed out of her ruined, filthy clothes. When she was done, the dress hung loose on her thin frame, but it was cover. It was dignity. Her lips trembled as she whispered a faint, "Thank you." He nodded, turning back to face her. He finally looked her in the eye, and his gaze was serious. "Now," he said, his voice hardening just a fraction. "You want to tell me what kind of trouble follows a man like Roy Dalton?" Her story spilled out then, in broken, fragmented pieces. She told him about the gambling, about being sold like a piece of livestock to Silas Crow. She told him how Silas had torn her dress, how he'd hit her, how she had fought back. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper as she described the splintered plank, the sickening crack as it hit his temple, the way he fell. I think I killed him," she finished, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Harlan listened in total silence, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out in sharp relief, his hands resting on the table, slowly curled into fists. He knew the kind of men she spoke of. He'd seen their faces on battlefields a world away, and he'd seen them in dusty saloons closer to home. Men who took what wasn't theirs and laughed while they did it. When she was finished, the room was quiet. Eliza sat huddled in the big chair, clutching the coat around her shoulders, waiting for his judgment. Would he turn her in? Would he throw her out, afraid of the trouble she'd brought to his door? He finally looked up, and the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something cold and hard, like forged steel. "You didn't kill him," he said. Eliza stared at him, confused. "What?" "But I saw him fall. He wasn't breathing." "Silas Crow's too mean and stubborn to die that easy," Harlan said, his voice flat. "I've known of him for years. A snake like that doesn't get taken down by one lucky strike." Relief warred with a new, colder fear inside her. Silas was alive, which meant he would be coming for her. "But then, what happens now?" she whispered. Harlan stood up and walked to the door, peering out into the dying storm. "Now," he said, his back to her, "we wait. Roy will go back to Silas, and when Silas is back on his feet, they'll come here. They'll come for you." He turned around, and the look on his face sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to anticipation. "But this time," he said, a grim finality in his tone, "they'll find me waiting. This ranch has a long memory for men like them, and it's time they paid their dues." What did he mean? What history did this quiet rancher have with a man like Silas Crow? She had stumbled out of one nightmare, only to land in the middle of a war she didn't understand, and the battle was coming right to their front door. The sun rose the next morning on a world washed clean by the storm. The air was fresh, but the peace was fragile, temporary. Eliza could feel it. Harlan could, too. He didn't speak much. He moved with a quiet, focused energy. He cleaned his revolver, checking each chamber with meticulous care. He propped his rifle by the door where it was easy to reach. He walked the perimeter of his property, checking fences, locking gates, his eyes scanning the horizon. Years in the army had taught him one hard lesson. You don't wait for trouble to find you. You prepare for it. You meet it head on. Eliza watched him, her heart a tight knot of anxiety. She asked if he really thought they would come back. Harlan didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his face set like stone, and gave a single sharp nod. That was answer enough. They didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It grew steadily larger, resolving into 3 riders. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She recognized them immediately. Silas Crow was in the lead, a dirty bandage wrapped around his head, his face a mask of purple bruises and pure hatred. Beside him rode Roy Dalton, his expression a pathetic mix of fear and greed. The third man was someone she'd never seen before. He was lean and wiry, with a nasty scar that sliced down one cheek and cold, dead eyes that promised violence. He looked like a man who enjoyed his work. They reined in their horses at the edge of the yard just beyond the fence line. Silas shouted first, his voice hoarse with rage. "Boone! You got something that ain't yours! Hand her over before this gets ugly!" Harlan didn't answer. He just stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door swing shut behind him. He moved slow, deliberate, like a man who had all the time in the world. The revolver was in his hand, resting easily at his side. Not pointed, not yet, but ready. The scar-faced man smirked, dismounted, and sauntered toward the gate as if Harlan was nothing more than a stubborn old farmer. He put his hand on the latch. "The boss said he wants the girl," the man sneered. "And I said this is private property," Harlan replied, his voice still calm, but with an edge like a razor blade now. The man laughed. "You're one old man. We're 3. The math ain't on your side, Grandpa." He opened the gate and took a step into the yard. He never saw the punch coming. Harlan moved off the porch in a blur of motion that defied his age. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, grabbed the man by the collar, and dropped him in the dirt with a single brutal punch to the jaw. The man groaned, spitting out a tooth, his confidence vanishing in an instant. Silas, stunned by the sudden violence, cursed loudly. He turned on Roy, hissing in his ear. "Do something! Don't just sit there! Show him you ain't a coward!" Roy's face went pale. He shook his head, his hand hovering near the rusted pistol tucked into his belt. Silas wasn't asking. He gave Roy a vicious shove, nearly knocking him out of his saddle. "Do it!" Roy stumbled off his horse, his hand trembling as he drew his pistol. He took a faltering step forward, the gun shaking so badly he could barely aim it. Harlan's eyes narrowed. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't firing a warning shot. He raised his revolver, aimed, and fired. The shot cracked like thunder in the still afternoon air. Roy screamed, a high, thin sound of agony, as the bullet tore through his thigh. He crumpled to the ground, his pistol falling uselessly in the dust beside him. Silas froze. All the rage, all the bluster, drained out of him in a single, heart-stopping moment. He saw the way Harlan stood, calm, steady, his finger still on the trigger. He saw the cold certainty in his eyes. This wasn't a bluff. This was a promise. Harlan's voice cut across the yard, sharp and clear as a death knell. "Next one goes in your chest, Silas." The words hung in the air, a final, non-negotiable term. Silas stared at Harlan, then at Roy writhing on the ground, then at his hired gun still trying to spit out his own blood. The fight was over before it had even begun. He yanked hard on his horse's reins, turning the animal so fast it reared in protest. He kicked it into a gallop, fleeing without a single look back. The scar-faced man scrambled to his feet and half ran, half limped after his boss, his face a mask of pure terror. They left Roy Dalton screaming in the dirt. From the doorway, Eliza watched, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like it. Such controlled power, such quiet, unshakable certainty. Harlan walked over to Roy, who was now blubbering and begging. He kicked the pistol away, then looked down at the man who had sold his own stepdaughter. "Get off my land," Harlan said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. Roy, clutching his bleeding leg, dragged himself toward the fence, leaving a pathetic trail in the dust. For the first time, Eliza truly believed it might be over, that Silas and Roy might finally be finished. But as Harlan turned back toward the house, his face wasn't triumphant. It was grim. "They'll be back," he said, not to her, but to the air itself. "And next time they won't come alone. They'll bring the law." Eliza's blood ran cold. The law? But they're the ones who broke it, she stammered. Harlan holstered his revolver and looked at her, his eyes full of a bitter knowledge she was only just beginning to understand. "In this county, Eliza," he said quietly, "the law is whatever Silas Crow pays it to be. We didn't just win a fight. We just started a war." He had shot a man in front of witnesses. It didn't matter that it was self-defense. Silas would twist the story. And the town's sheriff, a man named Cobb, was known to be in Silas's pocket. They weren't safe. They were fugitives. The silence that fell over the ranch after Roy was dragged away was heavier, more menacing than before. The immediate threat was gone, but Harlan was right. A bigger one was looming. "Sheriff Cobb is bought and paid for," Harlan explained, his voice low as he reloaded his revolver at the kitchen table. "He's been on Silas's payroll for years. He turns a blind eye to Silas's business dealings. In return, Cobb lives a comfortable life." Eliza sank into a chair, the faded blue dress feeling like a costume she couldn't take off. "So, they'll come here? To arrest you? Arrest me?" Harlan gave a short, bitter laugh. "They won't come to arrest me, Eliza. They'll come to kill me. They'll say I resisted. It'll be my word against a so-called officer of the law and two upstanding citizens." The trap was closing in. This ranch, which had felt like a sanctuary, was now the most dangerous place they could be. "We have to leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Harlan looked around the small, simple house. He looked at the mantelpiece where a single, faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes sat. His wife. "This is my home," he said, a deep well of stubborn pride in his voice. "I built it with my own two hands. I buried my wife on that hill out back. I'm not running from scum like Silas Crow." But then he looked at Eliza. He saw the terror in her eyes, the way she flinched at every sound from outside. He was a soldier, a fighter, but she was a survivor who had already endured too much. His expression softened. The stubborn pride gave way to a grim realism. "You're right," he sighed, the words tasting like defeat. "We can't stay. Not with you here. They'd use you to get to me." The plan was simple and desperate. They would pack what they could, food, water, ammunition, and ride out under the cover of darkness. They would head north, into the mountains. It was rough country, easy to get lost in, easy to hide in. For the rest of the day, a frantic energy filled the small house. Eliza packed dried meat and bread into saddlebags, while Harlan gathered every last cartridge he owned. As night fell, a thick blanket of clouds rolled in, swallowing the moon and stars. The darkness was a gift. Harlan saddled 2 horses in the barn. They were his best, strong and sure-footed. "We ride now," he said, his voice tense. "Cobb will likely wait till morning to form a posse. This is our only head start." They mounted up, the leather creaking in the silent barn. Harlan took one last look at the home he was leaving behind, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve. He was giving it all up. For her. A girl he'd only known for 2 days. The weight of his sacrifice settled on her shoulders, heavy and immense. They rode out, not toward the road, but cutting across the open pasture, heading for the dark, jagged line of the mountains on the horizon. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound the soft thud of their horses' hooves on the damp earth. Eliza kept looking back, expecting to see the telltale flicker of lanterns behind them. But there was nothing. Only darkness. Maybe they'd made it. Maybe they were free. Just as a sliver of hope began to dawn, Harlan suddenly pulled his horse to a halt. He held up a hand for silence. "What is it?" Eliza whispered. He didn't answer. He was listening, his head cocked, his body tense. Then she heard it too, faintly at first, then growing louder. The unmistakable sound of barking dogs, hunting dogs. They hadn't waited for morning. "They're on our trail," Harlan said, his voice grim. "Silas must have his own pack. They're tracking us." Panic seized her. They were being hunted like animals. "What do we do?" Harlan looked ahead, toward a rocky, wooded ridgeline. "We need to lose them. Head for the river. The water will hide our scent." He urged his horse into a gallop, and she followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The barking was getting louder, closer. It was a sound of pure, relentless pursuit. They crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at their faces. The ground grew steeper, more treacherous. Suddenly, Harlan's horse screamed. It stumbled, its front leg giving way, and went down hard. Harlan was thrown clear, landing with a heavy thud. "Harlan!" Eliza cried, pulling her own horse to a frantic stop. He pushed himself up, groaning. His arm was bent at an unnatural angle. It was broken. The horse on the ground whinnied in pain. Its leg was shattered, caught in a hidden crevice between 2 rocks. The barking was deafeningly close now. They could see the lights of lanterns bobbing through the trees below them. They were out of time. Harlan looked at his injured horse, then at his useless arm, and then at Eliza. The look in his eyes was one she would never forget. It was the look of a man who knew he was trapped. He reached for the revolver at his belt with his good hand. "Eliza," he said, his voice strained with pain. "You have to go. Take your horse and ride. Don't stop for anything." "No, I'm not leaving you." "You must!" he growled, his voice fierce. "I'll hold them off. Buy you some time. Go, now!" He limped over to his fallen horse, his face a mask of agony, and put the gun to its head. "I'm sorry, old friend," he whispered. The shot echoed through the woods, a final, heartbreaking crack. The barking of the dogs turned into a frantic frenzy. They were almost on top of them. "Go!" Harlan roared, turning to face the approaching lights, his revolver held steady in his one good hand. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. But then she saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't just saving her. He was atoning for something, for the wife he couldn't save, for a past she didn't understand. This was his last stand, and he was choosing to make it for her. With a sob, she yanked her horse's reins and kicked its sides, plunging deeper into the unforgiving darkness of the mountains. Behind her, the first shouts of the posse rang out. Then came the sound of another gunshot, and then another. She rode on, the sounds of the one-sided battle fading behind her, leaving her utterly and completely alone once more. The forest was a maze of black trees and unseen dangers. Eliza rode blindly, letting the horse pick its own path through the treacherous terrain. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh jolt of terror through her. She had left Harlan to die. The thought was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. He had saved her, sheltered her, and she had abandoned him to face a posse alone with a broken arm. Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the sweat and grime on her face. She didn't know where she was going. She had no food, no water beyond a single canteen, and only the clothes on her back. She was a fugitive, lost in the wilderness, hunted for a crime she didn't commit. The sounds of the gunfight had long since faded. There was only the wind in the pines and the frantic beating of her own heart. Who had fired the last shot? The uncertainty was a torment worse than any physical pain. As the first hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the horse slowed, exhausted. Eliza slid from the saddle, her own legs barely able to support her. She had reached a small clearing, a stream trickling through it. She knelt and drank deeply, the cold water a shock to her system. She had to make a choice: keep running north, deeper into the unknown, or turn back. Turning back was suicide. They would be looking for her, but leaving Harlan's fate unknown was a betrayal she wasn't sure she could live with. As she stared into the clear water of the stream, she saw her own reflection. A gaunt, terrified face stared back. But beneath the fear, there was something else. A flicker of the same fire that had made her pick up that wooden plank in Silas's cabin. Harlan had fought for her. He had sacrificed everything for her. She couldn't let it be for nothing. She wouldn't run, not anymore. Running was what Roy and Silas expected. It's what a scared girl would do. But she wasn't just a scared girl anymore. Harlan had shown her something else. He had shown her that you don't run from monsters. You face them. A new plan, wild and desperate, began to form in her mind. They wanted to hunt her in the wilderness? Fine. She would use the wilderness against them. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. And she knew there was only one place she might find it. It was a long shot, a dangerous gamble, but it was better than running and hiding until they found her. She mounted the horse again, but this time she didn't ride north. She turned the horse and began to ride west. Towards the mining town of Redemption, a rough, lawless place where men like Silas Crow were not always the most feared predators. A place where justice was often for sale to the highest bidder, or to the one with the most convincing story. She was no longer just running for her life. She was going to get an army of her own. She rode into Redemption covered in dust, a ghost emerging from the wilderness. The town was little more than one muddy main street, lined with saloons, a general store, and an assayer's office. It was a place that reeked of sweat, desperation, and the faint tantalizing hope of gold. Men stopped and stared as she passed. They were rough men, miners and prospectors, with hard hands and weary eyes. They saw a lone woman on a fine horse, wearing a dress that was clean but ill-fitting. They saw trouble. She ignored their gazes. She was looking for one man. She'd heard stories about him from other ranch hands, back when her life was simple. Stories whispered around campfires. They called him the preacher. Not because he served any god, but because when he spoke, men listened. And when he passed judgment, it was as final as damnation. His real name was Josiah Kane, a former bounty hunter who had retired to Redemption after a lifetime of violence. They said he ran the biggest saloon in town, and that nothing happened in Redemption without his knowledge and consent. She found the saloon easily enough. It was the largest building on the street, the sound of a tinny piano and loud laughter spilling out from its swinging doors. She dismounted, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was a place where women like her were either serving drinks or selling comfort. Walking in alone was an invitation for the worst kind of attention. She took a deep breath and pushed through the doors. The saloon went quiet. Dozens of faces turned to look at her. The piano player stopped mid-tune. For a moment, the only sound was the clinking of a glass being set down on the bar. She scanned the room, her eyes searching for the man in charge. He was sitting at a back table playing cards. He was older than she expected, with a calm, watchful face and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a banker. He looked up and met her gaze. He showed no surprise. He simply placed his cards face down on the table and gave a slight nod. Eliza walked toward him, her steps steady, even though her knees were shaking. The path to his table seemed to part before her as men moved out of her way. She stopped in front of his table. "They call you the preacher," she said, her voice clear and steady. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Some do," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What do you want, girl?" "I need help," she said. "I'm being hunted by a man named Silas Crow and a corrupt sheriff from the next county." A few of the men in the room snickered. A dispute from another county wasn't their problem. Josiah Kane held up a hand, and the room fell silent again. "Silas Crow," he said, the name tasting like something foul in his mouth. "I know the name. A man who preys on the weak, a bottom feeder." He looked at her again, his eyes sharp, analytical. "Why should I help you? What's in it for me?" This was the moment, the gamble. "I don't have money," she said, "but I have something better. I have information." She leaned forward, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Silas Crow runs his cattle through the North Pass to get to the railway," she said. "He moves them at night to avoid the inspectors, because a third of his herd doesn't bear his brand. He's been rustling from every small rancher between here and the territories for 5 years. Josiah's eyes narrowed. He hadn't known that. Rustling was a hanging offense, but more than that, it was bad for business. It made the whole region unstable. "How do you know this?" he asked. "The man who helped me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A rancher named Harlan Boone. Silas and his men came for me. Harlan fought them. I don't know if he's alive or dead. But before they came, he told me things. He knew all of Silas's secrets." Josiah Kane was silent for a long time. He picked up his cards, glanced at them, then laid them back down. He looked around the room, at the faces of the miners and prospectors watching him. Men who struggled every day, who were one bad season away from losing everything. Men who hated cheats and bullies like Silas Crow. "Men!" Josiah's voice boomed across the saloon. "This woman brings us news. Silas Crow, the fat tick who's been sucking the life out of this region, is a common cattle thief." A murmur went through the crowd. "He and his pet sheriff are hunting her, and the man who stood up to them," Josiah continued, his voice rising like a sermon. "They're using the color of law to cover up murder and theft." He stood up, his presence filling the room. "I say we teach Mr. Crow a lesson. I say we show him what happens when the good, hard-working people of this land have had enough. I say we ride, not for her," he said, pointing a thumb at Eliza, "but for ourselves, for every man he's cheated, for every law he's broken." A roar went up from the crowd. Men stood up, kicking back their chairs. They grabbed rifles from the walls. They checked the pistols at their belts. In the space of 5 minutes, Eliza had walked into a saloon looking for one man, and she was walking out with an army at her back. The final battle wasn't going to be a posse hunting a lone girl in the mountains. It was going to be a war brought right to Silas Crow's front door. The army that rode out of Redemption was not a disciplined military force. It was a chaotic collection of grim-faced miners, grizzled prospectors, and saloon toughs, all armed with whatever weapons they owned. They were fueled by cheap whiskey and a simmering resentment for men like Silas Crow. And they were led by Josiah Kane, the preacher, who rode at the front with Eliza by his side. "They'll be at Harlan's ranch," Eliza told him, shouting over the thunder of hooves. "They'll think I'd circle back, or they'll use it as a base to search the mountains." "Good," Josiah grunted. "Better to face the snake in its den." They rode hard, the setting sun at their backs. As dusk settled over the landscape, they saw a flicker of light in the distance, a campfire. It was the ranch. Josiah held up a hand, and the ramshackle army came to a halt. He, Eliza, and a few of his best men dismounted and crept forward on foot, using the rolling hills as cover. They crawled to the top of a ridge that overlooked the ranch house. What they saw made Eliza's blood run cold. Sheriff Cobb, Silas, and about 5 of their men were gathered around a fire in the yard. They were drinking, laughing, and tied to one of the porch posts was Harlan. He was alive, but he was in a bad way. His broken arm was in a crude splint, his face was bruised and swollen, and his shirt was stained with blood. But he was defiant, staring at his captors with pure, undiluted hatred. Silas took a swig from a bottle and swaggered over to Harlan. "Your little girlfriend abandoned you, old man," Silas sneered. "She's probably halfway to the territories by now. All this for nothing." He drove his fist into Harlan's stomach. Harlan grunted in pain, but didn't give Silas the satisfaction of crying out. Watching from the ridge, Eliza felt a white-hot rage build inside her. "We have to get him out of there," she whispered fiercely to Josiah. The preacher nodded, his eyes cold and calculating. "We will, but not with a frontal assault. They'd kill him before we got halfway across the yard." He scanned the layout of the ranch, the house, the barn, the corrals. "We create a diversion," he said. "Something big, something loud." He turned to one of his men. "Take 5 men. Circle around to the east. See that barn?" The man nodded. "I want you to light it up. When it's burning bright, we move in from the west. They'll be confused, distracted." The plan was simple, brutal, but it would work. As the men slipped away into the darkness, Eliza felt a knot of fear tighten in her gut. Harlan's home, the place he had built with his own hands, they were going to burn it to the ground to save him. She watched as Josiah's men crept toward the barn. A few tense minutes passed. Then, a small flicker of orange appeared at the base of the barn wall. It grew quickly, greedily licking its way up the dry wood. Within moments, the entire structure was engulfed in flames. "Fire!" one of the men in the yard shouted. Silas, Cobb, and the others spun around, their faces illuminated by the roaring inferno. For a moment, they were paralyzed by shock. "Now!" Josiah hissed. He and his men rose from the darkness and charged down the hill, screaming a battle cry that was more animal than human. The posse in the yard was caught completely by surprise. They fumbled for their weapons as figures charged at them from the darkness. Gunshots erupted. The night was filled with flashes of light, the roar of rifles, and the screams of men. In the chaos, Eliza had only one target. She ran, not towards the fight, but straight for the porch, straight for Harlan. Sheriff Cobb saw her coming. He raised his pistol, his face a mask of panic. A shot rang out from beside her. Cobb cried out and clutched his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the ground. Josiah Kane stood a few feet away, smoke curling from the barrel of his revolver. Eliza reached the porch and fumbled with the ropes binding Harlan. His one good hand came up to help her. "I knew you'd come back," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I'm not leaving you again," she said, her fingers finally pulling the last knot free. The fight in the yard was short and brutal. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Silas's men were quickly overwhelmed. Silas Crow himself tried to make a run for the horses, but Harlan, free now and filled with a righteous fury, intercepted him. Even with a broken arm, Harlan was a force of nature. He slammed Silas against the side of the house, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. "This is for my home," Harlan growled, driving his knee into Silas's gut. "And this is for her." He delivered a final, crushing blow with his good fist, sending Silas crumbling to the ground in an unconscious heap. The fighting stopped. The only sounds were the crackling of the burning barn and the groans of the wounded. Josiah Kane walked over to the injured Sheriff Cobb and kicked the gun away from his reach. "It's over, Sheriff," Josiah said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your man is a rustler, and you're an accessory. You'll be lucky if they only hang you." Justice had come to Harlan's ranch, a rough, fiery justice delivered by the outcasts of redemption. Eliza helped Harlan stand, supporting him as they looked at the wreckage. His barn was gone, his home was scarred by the fight, but he was alive, and they were together. "It's not much to come back to," Harlan said, his voice heavy. Eliza looked at him, then at the burning barn, and then at the faces of the men from Redemption who had risked their lives for a stranger's cause. "You can rebuild a barn," she said softly, clutching his good hand. "We can rebuild it." The story of what happened that night spread like wildfire. Silas Crow and Sheriff Cobb were hauled away, their reign of corruption and fear finally at an end. Roy Dalton was never seen in the county again, having fled with his wounded leg and what little was left of his pathetic pride. Harlan and Eliza did rebuild. With the help of the folks from Redemption, a new barn rose from the ashes of the old one. The ranch, once a place of fear and siege, slowly became a home again. It wasn't a storybook ending. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained. But they had faced the worst the world could throw at them, and they had not only survived, they had won. Their story became a legend in that part of the country. A story about the power of standing your ground, of fighting back when the world expects you to break. It was a story about how a single act of defiance, a simple word, "no," spoken in a dark cabin, could start a fire that burns away the rot and allows for new growth. And it was a story about how two broken people, a forgotten soldier and a girl sold for silver, could find in each other the strength to build a future. So I have to ask you, what do you think is the most important part of this story? Was it Eliza's initial defiance, Harlan's choice to stand his ground, or the community from Redemption deciding they had finally had enough? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if this story of grit and justice in the Wild West kept you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next tale from the frontier, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know what story is waiting just over the next horizon. Thanks for listening.